Atlantis, lost in time.
Welcome to Higher Comprehension with Chris and Jason. A lot of people think that Plato was the first person to mention Atlantis, to coin the term Atlantis. This is not true. There was a historian 2 generations before him that mentions Atlantis, way before Plato ever thought about it. But anyway, okay, so Plato apparently gets his story from a Greek politician named Solon. And he apparently lived in, I think it was Plato's grandfather's time. But anyway, he made the trip to Egypt. And he was utterly amazed with what he found. And he started talking to the priests, and he seen these hieroglyphic writings. And he wanted to know what it meant. So the priest started describing the story of Atlantis to him. So the story that we get comes from Plato, but Plato got it from Solon, and Solon got it from the ancient Egyptians. And Plato writes in, it's Timaeus and Crimeus, or Timaeus and Crimeus, or however you want to pronounce it. He writes that, I can't remember the exact date. He gives the dates of exactly how long it was before his time, and the time comes out, it adds up to like 11,400 years ago. And that's right around the time that the Younger Dryas impact theory comes into play, where we think that there was a huge cosmic impact of a sort that caused a global cataclysm and probably massive flooding around the world. And it probably triggered the end of the Ice Age, which caused the glaciers to start melting, which played hell with the weather. It caused the sea levels to rise 300 to 500 feet, which changes geography completely. Go back to Plato. He said that Atlantis was outside of the Pillars of Hercules. And we would take that to be the Rock of Gibraltar there, the exit out of the Mediterranean into the Atlantic Ocean. Yep, right there. Gibraltar is right there, and it's a small passageway, and it's like in between Morocco and Spain. Yeah, right there. And it said that after the sinking of Atlantis, which supposedly sank in a day and a night, that the waters became impassable. And nobody ever touches on that, but that makes me wonder if, that's why no one inside the Mediterranean knew about the New World. It was because for so long that, it says that it made it all muddy and stuff. If a whole continent broke up right there from getting hit by an asteroid or a comet or something, it would make that part of the waters impassable for a long time, and, people would forget that there was a new world over there after a while, and only a few people would know about it. But I've never heard anybody mention that. But anyway, so it just depends. There's so many possible sites for Atlantis that people give that it just amazes me.
One possible sites was, the Sahara Desert, the Eye of the Sahara. That's one of the ones that, a lot of people think might be where Atlantis was located.
Do you know why?
Because of the concentric circles that are there in the Eye of the Sahara. That's one of the locations I know of. I've also heard stories of it being in Antarctica.
Yeah.
That that it's been frozen over, and that's still lost underneath the ice.
And that there's pyramids there.
And there's pyramids, yep. And lots of people have found images of what look like pyramids on Google Earth and such. Yep. And there's pyramids around the entire globe, everywhere. I mean, there's hundreds of them in China, everywhere. There's a lot of suspected locations, and realistically, it's just been lost in time. Past history.
There's so many possibilities, and it's been a subject that's fascinated me for a very long time. You mentioned the Eye of the Sahara, and from what Plato wrote, it matches the descriptions. I mean, they would have had to have gone outside of the Pillars of Hercules to get there, but I don't think it really fits all of the descriptions. Antarctica, on the other hand, I could see that, for sure. there's always that possibility, but if so, I think it would be a much older civilization, at least if we believe geology. And look, I'm not an archaeologist, not an anthropologist, not a geologist, not a linguist. I'm not any kind of ist, other than an enthusiast. I try to read everything I can about any subject that interests me. And if we believe geologists, it's been a very, very, very long time, a lot more than, 15 or 20,000 years ago, that since Antarctica has been covered by the ice. I told you before, I can't remember if the sum was 50 or 500,000, but I want to say it's like 500,000 years since it's been ice-free, but I don't have the geology of the Earth memorized. One of the interesting things is in the Bahamas, Bimini, there was a psychic, Edgar Casey, and they call him the sleeping prophet. He would go into these trances or whatever and have people write down what he talked about. And he had many, I've heard as much as hundreds of pages of writings on Atlantis, on people that lived there. One thing I'd like to point out, this guy was a die-hard Christian. This man was a Sunday school teacher. But yet he believed in Atlantis. He believed that people in North America are reincarnated from people who died on Atlantis. All kind of stuff. But one of the things he predicted was that in the 1990s, we would find remnants of Atlantis in the Bahamas, an island called Bimini. And lo and behold, we find these, what appears to be man-made structures, although every archaeologist I've heard that's seen it says that it's natural, even though it's, got straight lines and things that water doesn't usually produce. And I've even seen where they're all lifted up like this high off the what would have been the ground 15,000 years ago when the water levels were lower, as much as 300 to 500 feet, and these are only like 20 feet underwater, so it definitely been on dry land at that point in time. So why they say that it's impossible, I don't understand, but the fact that this man predicted it, 3 or 4 decades before we found it, is kind of amazing. I've heard the Canary Islands, which is off the coast of Africa there on the left in the Atlantic. They've recently found a city off of Egypt called, I'm going to mispronounce this, Herculaneum. And it was a Greek-Egyptian city that is completely underwater. They have found some amazing things there, and I've heard people say, that might be but it doesn't match up with the dates.
Mediterranean now?
Yeah, it's in the Mediterranean. And so that's the thing. The island of Crete and Santorini are also possible sites of Atlantis. People think that is, but the dates don't match up. We're talking about 5,000 years ago as opposed to 11,400 years ago. And Plato was very specific about it. Besides being a historian and a philosopher and all this other stuff, when he was writing history, he was writing facts. He writes this as fact, so that's the way I read it. I don't know why historians want to say, well, it's just allegory like some of the other stuff, or it's just a story he writes or whatever. That's not the way he wrote it, but say what you will about it. The island of Crete was taken out, I think, by a tsunami that started from a volcano from Santorini, if I remember correctly, but it messed up both the islands. Look, if you're on a sinking island, people are going to leave from the closest spot they can, so they're going to be leaving from every side of it. Some of them went to the United States, or what is now the United States. Some of them went to Mexico. Some of them went to South America. Some of them went to Africa, like Morocco, where the Berbers live, or into Spain, where I can't remember their names. But both of those people have the highest Rh negative blood of any people on the earth, and they both have myths or origin stories that they come from Atlantis. They're all white-haired, or white, blonde or redheaded and blue-eyed, Aryan. That's a bad word these days, but there's so many, different myths and stuff, legends that go back to it or relate to it in some way. I mean, even the Aztecs have something that's similar to it. They supposedly came from a place called Aztlan that sunk, and then they went underground and then came back up, wandered through the desert or land for 4 centuries before they ended up in Mexico City, what is today Mexico City, and built Tenochtitlan. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that can line up. There's just so many different cultures that had myths or something like that come from that. Göbekli Tepe dates back to around the same time, and makes you wonder if, like, the people who started building the temples there, it wasn't like a reminder of some kind of global cataclysm. And man, that's just the thing. There's been a lot of different floods for a lot of different reasons, And the one, what I was talking about a minute ago with Crete that caused the tsunami or whatever that hit it, it was from a volcanic eruption, caused a landslide, which created the tsunami. You know, to those people, it was like their whole world had come to an end because their whole island got flooded. As far as they were concerned, the whole world was flooded. In these days where the earth is a lot smaller because of global communication, the internet, blah, 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 it wasn't like that back then. You know, things were much different. People were more separated. You know, news didn't travel that fast. And, you know, if something happened, you know, as far as you were concerned, it was your whole world. That's some of the myths from Atlantis, you know, is that they spread out and did these things. And there's also other legends that they were warlike. And one thing that says that the people from Atlantis would travel with like 7 of the artisans or whatever. They would have someone who taught writing, someone who taught like astrology, someone who would teach building, someone who would teach mathematics, and it was to teach the other people. But Plato in his writings, he says that you know, they were warlike people, and you know, they were supposedly started by the gods. You know, Atlas was supposed to be the first king of Atlantis, and he was supposed to be the son of Poseidon. It goes that he had 5 sets of twins or 10 sets of twins. I can't remember. I think it was 5 sets. But Atlas was the oldest. He was the first of the, you know, the first set of twins, and he was the first one born. So he became king. And then the others became princes of either parts of Atlantis or of other islands or colonies or something. Back then, they were supposed to have psychic powers and to be above other people and whatever. And then slowly, and they lost their divine nature. Eventually, they paid for it with being destroyed. And, you know, that's the way Plato describes it. But before that, he also talks about how they were at war with all the Mediterranean and had enslaved a lot of them. That's part of the Egyptian story, that the Greeks were actually the ones that rallied back and fought and beat back the Atlanteans and kept the rest of the people in the Mediterranean from being enslaved, and then freed the ones that were enslaved to them. You know, there's a lot of different myths about them and things that are said, and you know, so much has popped up since then. It's become so much a part of our culture, you know, almost that it is a part of pop culture. I mean, you've got in movies, cartoons, animated films, Aquaman, you know, he's Atlantean. I mean, it's just about in every part of our society, so much so that people don't even think about it anymore, and they automatically think that it's fake. But here's my thing. I think there's enough evidence that there was an advanced civilization here before, not the way that we would think of an advanced civilization like us, because they had different needs and they would have progressed in a different way to suit those needs. The funniest thing is that archaeologists say there's no evidence for these things, and yet, you know, for an advanced civilization back in the Ice Age or before, and yet there's so much information. They just overlook it, they ignore it, or they attribute it to other people. And go back to possible sites for Atlantis. Cuba. Recently, they have found, I want to say it's 9,000 feet underwater. It's remnants of a city along with pyramid shapes. And pyramids seem to be a global phenomenon from before the Ice Age, during the Holocene epoch. Holocene is the Ice Age. We live in the Holocene. The Ice Age was the Pleistocene era epoch. What the different epochs are is there's got to be a global change, something significant for an epoch to change. So when the Ice Age ended, that ended the Pleistocene epoch and started the Holocene, which we live in now, okay? So this goes back at least into the Pleistocene and probably further, or back into the, you know, beginnings of it, because it's so far underwater that, you know, there's no way that it's any kind of recent thing. There's Yamaguni in Japan, and I don't know if you've seen it or any photos of it. It is amazing, Chris, the structure of that. It's off the coast of Japan. I don't remember how far underwater it is, but it has steps leading up to the top of it. It's this huge megalithic structure, and it's another one that archaeologists say that is completely natural, and any geologist that I've heard of that's looked at it is like, there's no way that's natural. You know, because it's all straight lines and stuff. I mean, you can see where it's been weathered by water and stuff, but, you know, that's not what caused the formations, I would say. But I'm not an expert. I'm just repeating what I've seen and heard. If I had to pick a spot where Atlantis was going to be, it would be the Azores. Back in the Ice Age, it would have been much larger than what it is now. A lot of it would have been sticking out, and if it per se got hit by a asteroid or comet and broke up, because the mid-Atlantic shelf runs through there.
Yeah, because there's fault lines that come here and then kind
Absolutely.
of
Well, there's two tectonic plates that meet there in the Atlantic.
Yeah.
You have those two plates that come together. That's what forms the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And if you had a significant impact on that, it would set off volcanic activity, depending on the size of it. Geez, there's no telling what it would do. But not only that, it would cause a global flood for sure, because it's going to melt the glaciers. So that's going to flood. It's going to raise the ocean levels, which is going to change the geography of the Earth. People tend to live in coastal cities, even today. You imagine how many people would die if the next 2 weeks the water level rose 300 feet or 500 feet? Yeah. And it was the same in the past. People lived close to the shore to be able to fish, to have access to water. It might have been a river or a lake or whatever. Floods, it can happen really quick, especially something like that. I mean, if you had a asteroid hit or a comet, as hot as they get, just it hitting is going to be a massive thing, but the impact and the aftermath of it is even worse. I'd actually like to go back to the Azores Islands. I meant to touch a little bit more on that. We were talking about pyramids and stuff, and the pyramids are interesting because archaeologists seem to think that they just miraculously sprang up in Egypt and Mexico at the same time. And I say the same time because Kral Supe is around 4,500 years old, just like they say the Great Pyramid of Giza is. They have datable material that goes back that same time, but they say those civilizations had no contact, okay? And they say it's, what they call it, parallel evolution or something, where two things happen at the same time in different places or whatever. Huge coincidence. Yeah. It's like winning the Powerball tonight and the Mega Millions tomorrow. Bullshit. That didn't happen. All right. Somebody taught them how to do it. They were copying it from somebody. Whatever you want to say. And we see it so much. Like if you look, there's a ton of pyramids in the Sudan that were built centuries after the Egyptians quit building them. They're small, they're ugly, and they were tombs. But they were copies. Just like the Egyptians copied. Just like everybody else did. Anyway, I got sidetracked. So on the Azores, if that was Atlantis at one time, maybe that's the remnants of what's left. Maybe that was the top of the mountain sticking up, the very highest point. But anyway, at some point in time, somebody built like 140 pyramids on one of those little bitty islands in a very small space. And I think it's in honor of Atlantis. It's a reminder. It's something that we hadn't quite figured out yet. But an interesting side note to that is in between the Azores and Portugal, I want to say it was in 2018, in the bottom of the ocean, there in between those two, they found a pyramid. And I'm not even sure if 300 to 500 feet would put that above water, or, to where it was on dry land. I don't understand it, and they don't talk about it very much. But see, the thing is, there had to be people who were traveling the ocean. The Aborigines in Australia have been there for at least 40,000 years, and probably as long as 50 or 60,000 years. They had to come from somewhere. They came from Africa. That's a pretty long boat ride, and you can't just go one or two at a time. For you to colonize something, you have to take a group of people. You have to migrate with a large group, So, man, and, most of the Pacific Islands are inhabited. They were island hopping. They knew what they were doing. They could navigate the oceans. They were so much smarter than we give them credit for, dude. And I think Atlantis has come down to us as a myth from all of these different civilizations. I don't know if there was one. I don't know for sure that it was just one, but maybe they all learned to build pyramid. Maybe one of them built a pyramid and the rest of them kind of copied. I don't know, but I think we've had cities for hundreds of thousands of years. I think, there's sites in Africa where they say where these two guys were saying that the city's 200, 300,000 years old. Archaeologists laugh at them and say, no, there's no way. You know, there were cities in Americas at least as long ago as there was in Europe and Africa, you know. And in the Middle Ages, when, you know, they came and took over the Americas, I think there was more people here than there were in Europe at the time. Much better cities, you know, well thought out, well planned, you know, clean, disease free for the most part, you know. Like, I hate to take anything away from the Incas because, you know, I think they did some amazing things, but even they themselves told the Spanish that most of the things there they didn't build. You know, it was here when we got here. And I think that's the same with the Egyptians. I think the Sphinx was there when they got there. I think the three pyramids sitting on the Giza Plateau was there when they got there. I think it's much older than what they say. I think it goes back into the Ice Age. And it was probably built by the Atlanteans, or what we refer to as the Atlanteans, or whatever lost civilization, you know, there was. And it's not to say that they built everything, but if you look at Machu Picchu in Peru that the Incas built, there's like different phases of construction. And yeah, it could have been in the different periods that they, you know, what, the 3 centuries that they were around or whatever, but I just don't see it. The stones on bottom, if you look at it, will be like megalithic blocks, and then you see where the Inca come back and do like repair work. And there's aqueducts that run through, you know, there's the quote unquote Inca road, you know, that runs for like 2,000 miles or whatever. And I don't think they built most of that stuff. I think they utilized it, you know. Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, some of the walls in Cusco, where each block is cut to fit the one next to it. They're individually cut, had to been done on site, because some of them will have up to 14 sides. That's a high number, but there's several of them that have that many. Most of them have 4, 5, 6 sides, but they'll be odd shaped. Some of them look like they've been vitrified, which means that they've been subjected to extremely high heat. There's stories of different advanced civilizations, you know, myths, legends, you know, around the world. There's at least 150 flood myths, but like I was talking about earlier, you know, a lot of those were probably localized. And to them, it was their whole world, but there's been a couple of floods that have, you know, rocked the world, I think. And I think the one that might have hit Atlantis might have been one of those. Probably flooded the, you know, the Mediterranean there. The thing about, yeah, there could definitely have been many different, you know, civilizations here, and archaeologists say, well, why aren't we finding evidence of it? And like I said earlier, you know, a lot of it, the evidence they overlook, they ignore, they won't talk about. But not only that, think about something. If it was a civilization 300,000-400,000 years ago, and they had something traumatic that happened, an asteroid hitting or something, or, you know, the plate tectonics move. The Earth changes over time, but a lot of that stuff would be on the bottom of the ocean, or completely covered over, like say, you know, the crater out in Arizona, the big huge one. If there was a civilization built up around that when it hit, what would be left of it? You know, if that hit New York City today, what would be left of New York? You know, nothing.
There'd be nothing left. What about the Atlanteans and their lost power and their flying devices?
The Egyptians had a bird. We found a wooden bird. I think they call it the Saqqara bird. They found it in Saqqara. And somebody made a bigger replica of it and put it in a wind machine, and it was completely aerodynamically sound. Like they could have built an airplane. Atlanteans, you know, they were attributed to having that, and some people think that the pyramids might have been a power source. You know, like maybe like something like Tesla was talking about, wireless electricity or whatever. But think about this: around the world, there are geoglyphs that cannot be seen from the ground. They can only be seen from the air. They're in North America. They're in Canada, United States. all the way down to where the Nazca lines are. They're in Africa, they're in Europe, they're in Asia, probably some in Russia, probably some in Antarctica, for all we know. But yet you can only see them from the air. Well, hot air balloons is the most likely answer in my mind. It would be the easiest way for the ancients to fly. I want to say Marco Polo describes something like that in his writings about the Chinese, that they had something similar to a hot air balloon. I think it highly likely that whoever built the Nazca lines had something similar. It would have been easy to do.
Maybe they were saucer shaped, and that's where they get that idea from.
Right. But think about it, man. People back then, say 2,000 years ago, they were just like you and I. They had the same brain capacity. They thought like us. They were just as capable. And a lot of things have been invented and lost and reinvented. You mentioned Antarctica. The Nazis were into just about everything, and they looked for the ancient Aryans or Atlanteans. And one of the places they went in 1938 was Antarctica, and they set up New Swabialand, a base there, and we're looking for the origins of the white race, basically. They were racist, basically, horrific. Basically, they were trying to justify their whole Nazi philosophy and everything, and, they called themselves the Third Reich, and it was because they considered, I think it's the Holy Roman Empire, they considered the first one, and then the German Kingdom, the second one, and then them the third. They came up with this whole ideology, and they were trying to find proof of it. They went to the Canary Islands and found the blonde-haired, blue-eyed mummies there. They went to Tibet and went to all these other places, but I don't know if they were looking for Atlantis or aliens or what, but they definitely were in Antarctica and looking for things, and we found weird stuff down there. I'm not even sure if it was so much him or Himmler, but when they went down there, there was reports that they started a base and that they found people living underground there, and that they were advanced, and that they'd taught them how to build the flying disc, which we know as UFOs and flying saucers today, and that's the accounts of it seem to start after 1945. There's a story about an operation that we sent down in 1947 led by Admiral Byrd, and it was called Operation High Jump. And I forget the exact details, but it was supposed to be a expedition, exploration to learn things. And they took a fleet of ships down there and airplanes and all this. They were supposed to be gone a certain amount of time, and they come back a few months later with their tail between their legs. And I don't know if this is all true, but supposedly his diary went public after his death. His daughter had it published or something. And then there was accounts of it where he said that they ran into the remnants of the Nazi Empire and got their butts kicked, that the saucers they had, man, we really got off of Atlantis. But anyway, could go from...
Well, this has to do with the search of Atlantis.
Could go from pole to pole in a matter of minutes, saying that's how fast they were, and that the Nazis were just trying to leave, that they were leaving the planet, that the aliens or whoever they met, the Atlanteans, gave them the ability for space travel, and that they were getting the hell out of here. But in the end, I think we're left, with a wonderful story. Like I said earlier, it completely absorbed into pop culture. It's around us in all kinds of ways that no other civilization is. Not even the Roman Empire, which, influences our life in so many ways. I don't think any other civilization ever has. If it's a mythical one, it's made more of an impact on this planet than any other. And to think that it was never even real is hilarious. But I think they were. Like I said before, I don't think they called themselves, Atlanteans. But I don't think it was just one. I think there was many. If I had to try to wrap it up, I would say that, there was definitely a civilization that we call Atlantis. They were probably located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Spain and Portugal. That they were advanced in ways that we don't understand. And that it probably disappeared because it's on the bottom of the ocean, and that's why they don't find much proof of it other than the things that they built that are still around that we attribute to other people.
Next week, we'll be talking about the history of wrestling.
Yeah, snap into a Slim Jim.